Now let's take a look at using the normal as an approximation of the binomial. Get my pen. Quit that. Get my pen to work. There we go. This is normal as an approximation to the binomial. Not that my writing's really good anyway, but it seems like when I do this on my laptop, just doesn't have the memory it needs. Let's say n is 200. Little p is going to be, let's say, 35%. And those will be given to you in a problem. And we're going to look at different cases. Our first one is when it's, let's see, what's good wording? Let's see, more than. So more than 100 and 2. Well, if I draw the picture, 102 is right here. More than, you're going to need to do a 0.5 correction factor. You add or subtract it. In this particular problem, we'll add it. So we got 102.5. And more than means I shade this way. Now, how you determine, do you add or subtract 0.5? You look at your wording, and you ask yourself if your wording includes 102. If your wording includes 102, your shading has to include 102. In this particular problem, our wording did not include 102, so our shading cannot include 102. If I had went back to 101.5, it would have included 102. So again, wording includes it, shading has to include it. Wording doesn't include it, then shading shouldn't include it. Now, unfortunately, Excel doesn't handle that real well. We need to rewrite it as 1 minus and 102.5 shades to the left. Now 1 is everything. Everything's shaded. If I subtract off everything shaded to the left of 102.5, that'll leave me everything shaded to the right of 102.5. So that's how we're going to plug it into our, I'm going to keep saying calculator, into Excel. So do 1 minus and norm dist. Now our first one, the x, is going to be 102.5. Now our mean, this is n times p. So 200 times 0.35, comma, and our standard deviation, that's going to be the square root of 200 times 0.35 times 0.65. That's 1 minus p. So if that's p is 35%, then the other one is going to be 65%. They have to add up to 100%. Closing parentheses on square root, comma, and 1 for cumulative. And now give that to us. Of course, I'm making these numbers up, so it's going to come out kind of wild. But this is more than, so x is greater than 102. Is this one? Well, let's look at least case. I'm trying to pick words so you can, they're not just so direct as less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So at least 80. I'll draw our picture. Here's 80. And again, our guideline is if the wording includes 80. If the wording includes 80, then our shading has to include 80. At least 80 does include 80. So I'm going to subtract 0.5. So I got 79.5. At least means I shade to the right. Again, our wording includes 80, so our shading has to include 80. If I had added the 0.5 and shaded to the right, it wouldn't have included 80. So wording includes 80, shading has to. To put anything into Excel, it has to be shaded to the left, though. So I'm going to come over here. Here's my 79.5. 1 is everything. So if I subtract off everything shaded to the left of 79.5, that'll leave me everything, the shading to the right. So that's how I'll plug it in. 1 minus norm distribution. What did I say? 79.5. Our mean, which is n times p. So 200 times 0.35. How to write that down on a piece of paper. Comma, square root of 200 times 0.35 times 0.65. Comma, and then 1 for cumulative. And that'll give us our answer. And this one was probability x is greater than or equal to 80. Actually, no, that said 11. Let me write it down. N is 200, and little p is 0.35. Okay. Let's look at the probability at most 75. So here's 75. At most 75. You have to think if the wording includes 75. At most 75 does include 75. So if I subtracted off 0.5, then our shading would include it. So I have to add 0.5. Because at most is shaded to the left. Again, if our wording includes 75, our shading has to include 75. And this is in perfect form because Excel's looking at it shaded to the left. So let me come over here, equals norm dist 75.5. Excuse me, n times p, 200 times 0.35, comma, square root of 200 times 0.35 times 0.65, closing parentheses on square root, comma, 1 for cumulative. And that gives us our answer there. And this one was, what was this one? Most 75. So probability x is less than or equal to 75. Well, I'm drawing a real blank here. I'm looking for a word less than a number. Less than, well, oh well. Less than 90. So here's our 90. Now our wording, less than 90, doesn't include 90. So our shading cannot include 90. So I'm going to subtract 0.5. Because less than is shaded this way. And if our wording doesn't include 90, our shading cannot include 90. If I had added 0.5, it would include a 90. Which is perfect for this. So I'm going to equals norm dist and 89.5. Mean is n times p, 200 times 0.35, comma, square root of 200 times 0.35 times 0.65, closing parentheses on square root, 1 for cumulative, and that gives us our answer there. What was this one? Probability that x is less than something, 90. Okay, let's look at between case. Then we'll look at the equals case. Okay, so probability that, and I'm not going to try to put it in any kind of fancy words. 3. What am I doing there? Okay, let's try this again. 80 to 90. Well, if I think of 80 to 90, that's shading in between. Now our wording up here includes 80 and 90 because I put the less than or equal to's. So I'm going to subtract 0.5 here. So this is going to be 79.5. And I'm going to add 0.5 here. So this will be 90.5. Because again, if the wording includes 80 and 90, our shading has to include 80 and 90. Now Excel doesn't handle that real well. So what we have to do is here's 90.5. And everything's shaded to the left here. And if I subtract off 79.5, like that. Now here's 79.5. And what we want is what's shaded in between them. So if I subtract off the what's shaded to the left, which is this one, that's going to give us everything in between 79.5 and 90.5. So both of these are in perfect form for Excel. So I'm going to do norm dist 90.5 n times p, 200 times 0.35, comma, square root of 200 times 0.35 times 0.65, closing parentheses 1 minus norm dist 79.5, comma 200 times 0.35, comma square root of 200 times 0.35 times 0.65, comma 1, or wait a minute, let me think. What am I doing? Square root of n times p times, okay, comma, and then 1. Closing parentheses on the the norm dist, I guess, and enter. And this is between 80 and 90. Now, if it didn't include 80 and 90, you'd have to handle it appropriately from that point. Let's look at one more. Excuse me. I don't remember what number this was, but x equals 80. Now here, our wording includes 80, so our shading has to include 80. So we're going to subtract 0.5, and we'll add 0.5. Like this. Because our shading, if our wording includes 80, our shading has to. This is the same as the last type. We're going to take 80.5, shaded to the left, and we'll subtract off 79.5, shaded to the left. Sorry. Because again, if I look at this, let's say this is 79.5. If I started with this area shaded, if I subtracted off the area shaded to the left of 79.5, that'll leave me what's in the middle, which is what I'm wanting. And we're ready to put that into Excel now. Equals norm dist 80.5 n times p, square root of n times p times 1 minus p. 1 minus norm dist 79.5 200 times 0.35 square root of 200 times 0.35 times 0.65, 1 like that. And this is the probability of exactly 80. And those would be all our different cases you could run across when working normals and approximation of binomial problems.